Slave fixes broken portrait from master's wife. Then she said, "You're handsome, you know that." The sky above the Whitford estate hung heavy with the weight of an approaching storm, the kind that dimmed the afternoon into an early twilight. The air carried that scent of electricity and wet soil, as if the world were holding its breath for the first crack of thunder. Eleanor Whitford stood in the grand parlor, staring at the polished floorboards where the shattered portrait lay. She didn't know whether the fall had been caused by a loose hook, a stray breeze through the window, or simply fate. She knelt beside the broken frame, even though kneeling made her feel foolishly exposed. Her fingers brushed the split wood. Her own painted face still looked serene on the canvas, eyes soft, body posed as though she were fragile enough to break with a single touch. Her husband's painted likeness, on the other hand, had cracked directly down the center. The line ran through his jaw and across the knot of his cravat, splitting him neatly in two. It felt like a message she wasn't brave enough to name. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the branches against the windows. Eleanor exhaled slowly and rose, smoothing the front of her pale blue gown. She had always hated that portrait, hated how stiff she appeared, how cold he looked beside her. But she hated the idea of her husband seeing it broken even more. She stepped to the hallway and called softly, "Someone fetch Daniel, quickly." Her voice carried through the house like a whisper riding the air. Feet moved distantly across the floors, and a moment later, the answer came. "Yes, ma'am. I'll send for him." Eleanor retreated to the parlor, heart beating faster than the situation warranted. It was only a broken frame, only a small inconvenience. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just shifted, like the way a room feels different after a candle flame flickers without reason. Daniel arrived within minutes, stepping into the room with measured footsteps and steady breath. The fading light from the windows framed him in soft amber. He was taller than most men on the plantation, broad through the shoulders, yet he moved quietly, almost gracefully, as if he was always mindful of how much space he occupied. "You sent for me, ma'am?" His voice was deep, calm, respectful. Eleanor nodded, stepping aside so he could see the damage. The portrait fell. The frame. "It's broken. I'm hoping you can fix it." Daniel walked toward the fallen painting and lowered himself into a crouch. His fingers traced the fractured edges with a gentleness that caught her breath. There was something mesmerizing in the way he moved, careful, deliberate, as though he valued even the smallest detail. "I can repair it," he murmured. "The wood split clean. I'll bind it and seal it with resin. It should hold." "You're certain?" she asked. His eyes lifted to hers, dark, steady, watching her with a quiet intelligence she was never sure she was meant to notice. "Yes, ma'am." Her heart moved strangely in her chest. "Good," she said softly. "I trust you with it." He nodded and moved to lift the portrait from the floor. When she bent to help, their fingers grazed, so lightly that another person might have missed it. But Eleanor felt everything. A small, sharp shock traveled through her hand and up her arm, startling her. She pulled back a fraction of a second too fast. Daniel didn't look up, but she could sense he'd noticed. Together, they lifted the portrait onto a small table she dragged close to him. Eleanor's breath brushed her lips in uneven rhythm, and she stood back, trying to compose herself, trying to remind her own heart that this was just a simple repair, nothing more. But her heart whispered otherwise. Daniel examined the wood again. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows from earlier work, revealing strong forearms dusted with fine flecks of sawdust. His shirt clung slightly to his back from the humidity. He looked like a man carved from determination itself, steady, grounded, alert. A bead of sweat gathered near his temple and slid slowly down the side of his face. Eleanor reached instinctively for a handkerchief. "You're sweating," she said softly without thinking. He froze as if stunned by the attention. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean." "You don't have to apologize." Her voice came out quieter than intended. "Hold still." Her hand lifted before her mind caught up. She stepped closer and gently pressed the handkerchief to his cheek. Daniel inhaled sharply, barely a breath, but she felt the tremor of it. His skin was warm beneath the cloth, warmer than she expected, warmer than she should have allowed herself to notice. She withdrew too late to hide the tremor in her fingers. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. She nodded, unable to trust her tongue. Daniel returned to the task, binding the wood with linen strips he brought. His fingertips were deft, his concentration absolute. Eleanor sat near the window with a book open on her lap, one she didn't read a single sentence of. Instead, she watched him from behind the safety of lowered eyelashes. Every movement of his hands, every shift of his shoulders, every breath she pretended not to notice. The house was unusually silent. Most of the servants were busy preparing for the storm. The overseer had ridden out earlier to inspect the outer fields, and her husband was miles away across the state. It was the first time in a long time she had been alone with anyone, let alone him. As the sky darkened, the distant rumble of thunder began to roll across the fields. Shadows stretched longer across the parlor floor like dark ribbons. Daniel sat close to the portrait, watching the resin dry. His presence filled the room in a way Eleanor felt too keenly. She closed her book even though she had not turned a page. "How long will it take?" she asked. "A few hours," he replied. "I can stay to watch it, if you'd prefer." "I would," she whispered before her mind could stop her. Daniel went still for a moment, just a blink of hesitation, as if he needed to weigh the danger of her answer. But he bowed his head. "Yes, ma'am." The storm outside deepened. Rain began to patter softly against the window glass, building into a steady rhythm. Candlelight flickered as Eleanor lit two more lamps, their warm glow casting wavering patterns across Daniel's face. She stole glances, not bold, not reckless, just small shifts of her gaze. But each one burned more intensely than she meant. Daniel's voice finally broke the silence. "Begging your pardon, ma'am. May I ask how it fell?" "I don't know," she said, "but I'm not sorry it did." Daniel raised his eyes slowly. His voice was soft. "No, ma'am," she breathed out. A tiny confession. It never felt like the truth. That painting. That marriage. Daniel lowered his gaze quickly, respectfully, but she could feel the tension in the air tighten. Fragile, bright, dangerous. The next words left her lips as if pulled from somewhere hidden inside her, somewhere she had kept locked for years. "You're handsome," she whispered. "You know that, don't you?" Daniel's breath stopped. He did not move, did not blink. His hands froze on the linen strip he'd been adjusting. "Ma'am." His voice was barely audible. "You shouldn't say that." But she had already said it, and the storm outside began to break, thunder cracking across the sky as if the heavens themselves had heard her forbidden truth. Their eyes locked, and for the first time since the moment he entered the room, there was no hiding in either of them, no turning back from what had just begun. Rain lashed against the tall parlor windows as if trying to break its way inside, each gust louder than the one before. The sky outside had turned charcoal black, the storm rolling over the Whitford plantation with relentless force. Inside, candlelight flickered and stretched across the walls, distorting shadows, making the room feel smaller, more intimate, and far more dangerous. Eleanor felt her breath snared in her throat the moment the words left her lips. She could still hear them echoing inside her mind, hear the tremble beneath them. "You're handsome. You know that, don't you?" She hadn't meant to speak them. She hadn't meant to let even a shard of her inner world slip free. But Daniel had looked so calm, so composed in the golden light, the strength in his hands wrapped around the fractured wood, the softness in his eyes when he dared look up. Something inside her had broken loose. Daniel stood frozen. His hands rested on the frame, linen strip halfway tied, chest rising and falling with slow, controlled breaths. He did not dare lift his eyes at first. He stared at the portrait as if it could save him from her words. But it couldn't. Nothing could, not from the truth already spoken aloud. Finally, he swallowed and lifted his gaze. "Ma'am," he murmured, "it ain't safe for you to say things like that." The candle beside him shook in the draft, and the flame dipped. Eleanor exhaled shackily and stepped closer, her palms damp, her heart twisting painfully. I know, she whispered. I know it isn't. Thunder cracked overhead. The house trembled. Daniel straightened slightly, though he kept one hand firmly on the portrait frame, as if touching something broken anchored him. If anybody heard. He stopped, as if imagining it was too dangerous even to finish the sentence. Eleanor's pulse thundered in her ears as loudly as the storm outside. No one did, she said. No one is near the house. The servants have gone to the kitchen to prepare for the storm. The overseer is still out by the west field. And my husband. Her lips tightened with bitterness. He stays away. The mention of her husband seemed to unsettle Daniel more than anything else. His jaw tightened. His shoulders stiffened. That don't matter, ma'am, he said softly. These walls have ears. There ain't a safe word between us in this house. She knew he was right. But she also knew she had already stepped off the edge of safety and could not pretend she hadn't. Eleanor moved to the window, pressing a trembling hand against the glass. The reflection of the lightning flashed across both their faces. Do you think I don't know the danger? She asked, her voice thickening with emotion she'd never allowed herself to express. You think I'm a fool? Daniel closed his eyes briefly. No, ma'am. Never that. Then why? She said, turning back toward him slowly. Do you look at me as if I am trying to destroy you? Daniel's eyes lifted to hers at last, dark and intense, not cold, but scared. Scared in a way she had never seen before. Because, he whispered, you could. The words cut her deeply. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Eleanor stepped closer, drawn as if the air itself pulled her toward him. The lines of his face were illuminated by the shifting candlelight. The strong shape of his jaw, the curve of his cheekbone, the hint of uncertainty behind his composure. She had seen him many times around the house, quiet, diligent, careful, but never like this. Never with his guard cracked open. I don't want to destroy you, she said quietly. His gaze flickered. Wanting ain't the same as doing, ma'am. Eleanor. She corrected him before she could stop herself. He breathed in sharply. I can't call you that. You can. A tremor lived in her voice. Just once. Daniel's fingers tightened around the frame until the wood creaked softly under his grip. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, eyes locked on hers as if trying to determine what was real and what was danger wrapped in softness. The storm deepened. Rain hammered the windows. Wind howled down the chimney. A sudden flash of lightning lit the room blinding white, and a deep roar followed, shaking the air like a beast awakening. Eleanor gasped despite herself. Instinctively, her hand flinched toward him. Daniel stood immediately, abandoning the portrait. It's all right, he murmured. Just thunder. I know. She tried to steady her breathing. Storms always unsettle me. His posture shifted. Not bold, not reckless, just protective. His hands hovered slightly near her arms, close enough that she felt the heat of them, but not touching. Not without permission. Eleanor looked up at him, her breath trembling. You can stay close, she said softly. I don't mind. I do, Daniel replied in a strained whisper. Because if I get too close, I ain't sure I'll know how to step back again. Her heart stumbled. He took half a step backward, but the room was too small, the air too charged. She followed without thinking. Why? She asked. Why would you feel that way? Daniel exhaled harshly, and when he finally spoke, his voice was raw, too honest, too exposed. Because, ma'am, because you're kind, and gentle, and lonely, and I've seen it. I've seen it for years, even when you think nobody else does. Her breath caught. I see how you walk these halls like a ghost, he continued, eyes fixed on hers. I see how your smile dies the moment anyone stops looking. I see how he hesitated, how he leaves you alone, how he don't care what you feel, what you dream, what you fear. His voice softened. I see you, more than I should. Eleanor felt tears sting the backs of her eyes. Daniel lowered his gaze immediately. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't mean to say so much. It's the truth, she murmured. and no one ever tells me the truth. Daniel's breath shook faintly. Some truths are dangerous to speak. I'm already living inside danger, she said. Every day in this house. He looked at her then, fully, with a depth that made her knees weaken. The candlelight trembled between them, reflecting in his dark eyes like molten gold. Ma'am, he whispered, if anyone saw us right now, like this, standing this close, they won't. Her voice was fragile but sure. I'm not afraid. I am, he said. He didn't move. Neither did she. A gust of wind slammed against the window, and she startled again, smaller this time, but enough that her hand found the sleeve of his shirt, fingers curling reflexively around the fabric. The moment she touched him, everything changed. Daniel inhaled sharply. His eyes widened a fraction, surprise, warning, longing all tangled together. I'm sorry, she whispered, drawing her hand back slowly. No, he said quickly, voice hoarse. Don't, don't apologize. Silence swallowed the room, punctuated only by the storm outside. Daniel stepped back to the portrait, trying to anchor himself again in the safety of his task. He touched the frame, testing the resin with careful pressure. It's holding well, he murmured, though his voice trembled slightly. Another hour, maybe two. Eleanor came to stand beside him. Then you'll stay. He swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Another flicker of lightning bathed them both in silver. The storm was not leaving any time soon. Eleanor watched his hands work, watched the strength and precision in each movement. And then, with the softness of a confession carried by candlelight, she whispered, Daniel, I want to understand you. I want to know what you think, what you feel. You're not invisible to me. He closed his eyes. A shudder passed through him, too quick for her to fully catch, but real. You shouldn't want that, he breathed. But I do. Slowly, very slowly, Daniel lifted his head and met her gaze. Then nothing between us, he whispered, will ever be simple again. And for the first time, Eleanor realized the truth. It already wasn't. The storm did not let up. If anything, the rain grew heavier, sheeting down the tall windows so fiercely that the outside world blurred into streaks of gray. The thunder rolled like drums in the distance, echoing through the halls of the mansion until the walls seemed to vibrate with each rumble. But inside the parlor, all the world had narrowed to the two of them. Daniel worked in near silence. Eleanor hovered nearby, not hovering out of courtesy or impatience, but out of something far more dangerous, something that had rooted itself inside her chest and refused to let go. Her fingertips tingled from where she had brushed his sleeve, and she kept finding her gaze drifting to the place where her touch had been, as if the memory of it still lingered on her hand. Daniel moved with a kind of controlled precision that almost felt like prayer. Anything could betray him, his breathing, his posture, even the way he held his tools. He was a man who understood the power of stillness. He had lived his whole life in a world where a wrong movement could turn deadly. Eleanor wondered how long he had been training himself not to be fully alive. She didn't speak at first. She stood near the window, her fingers grazing the drapes, eyes returning again and again to where he knelt by the small table. His shoulders shifted under the thin fabric of his shirt, muscles tightening with each stroke of the sanding cloth as he cleaned the splintered resin. A single candle sat near him, its flame trembling but refusing to die despite the drafts of storm wind slipping into the room. His shadow flickered on the wall behind him, strong, tall, steady. He did not look up again until she spoke his name without meaning to. Daniel. Her voice cracked just slightly. He stilled. Slowly, carefully, he turned his head until their eyes met. Thunder rolled above them like an omen. Yes, ma'am? She stepped closer, ignoring the warning in his voice, the fear in his stillness, the unspoken rules of the world they inhabited. You don't have to call me that when we are alone, she said softly. His jaw tightened, but not with defiance, with restraint, with fear, with longing. I do, he said quietly, because pretending we're anything other than what we are, it ain't safe for either of us. But we are alone, she insisted gently. Daniel rose slowly, slow enough that she could see the tension ripple through him, slow enough that he could stop if she stepped back. She didn't. She remained right where she was, breath shallow, heart pounding so hard she wondered if he could hear it. He stood only a foot away from her now, and she realized, with a shock she felt in every part of herself, just how tall he was. How close. How warm. He smelled faintly of cedar shavings and the clean scent of the rain-soaked air that had followed him inside earlier. "Ma'am Eleanor," he whispered, choking slightly on her name as if it was a forbidden fruit he wasn't allowed to taste. "You know why I can't call you that." She felt her pulse jump. "Tell me." He swallowed. His throat flexed. His breath trembled. "Because saying your name makes me forget my place." Her heart jolted. "And what is your place?" Daniel's anguish flickered across his face like the lightning outside, quick, violent, unhidden. "Where your husband put me," he said softly. "Where this world keeps me. Where I gotta stay if I want to live long enough to see anything beyond these fields." His words struck something raw and aching inside her. She took one small step closer. "I don't want you to feel that way with me." He stepped back immediately, one pace only, but the tension in the room didn't release. It tightened. "Ma'am, you want things you shouldn't." Her breath trembled. "Do you?" Silence. A heavy, resounding silence that seemed louder than the storm itself. Daniel did not move. He did not breathe. His eyes lowered to the floor as if afraid she might read the truth on his face. "Don't ask me that," he whispered. "Please." The plea in his voice shattered something inside her. "Why not?" she asked. He lifted his head then, slowly, reluctantly, and she saw the truth in his eyes before he even spoke. "Because if I answer you honest." His voice cracked. "It'll change everything." The room felt suddenly too small, too quiet. Eleanor's fingers curled into her skirt. She tried to speak but found no words. Only feeling, deep, overwhelming, terrifying. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, bright enough to reveal the fine tremor in Daniel's hands. He clenched them into fists to hide it. She noticed. So she did something reckless, quietly reckless, softly reckless, but reckless all the same. She reached out and, with the gentlest touch, placed her hand over his. Daniel inhaled sharply, as if her touch burned. "Ma'am," he whispered, startled. His hand twitched beneath hers, instinctively wanting to pull away, yet unable to do so. Not because she held him tightly, her touch was feather light, but because something stronger than both of them held him there. Thunder shook the house. "You're trembling," she said softly. He tried to swallow the emotion in his throat. "I ain't. It's just the storm." But she knew the storm wasn't the reason. His hand trembled again beneath hers. Eleanor's breath softened, deepened. The warmth of his skin seeped into her palm, traveling up her arm until she felt dizzy with it. He whispered her name again, so softly she almost didn't hear it. "Eleanor." It was the first time he had spoken it willingly. Her knees nearly gave out. He closed his eyes. His lashes trembled, his brow furrowed with conflict so deep it looked as though it hurt him to feel it. "You shouldn't let me touch you," he murmured, voice husky with restraint. "You shouldn't even stand this close." "I don't feel afraid of you," she said. "I'm afraid," he breathed. She stepped even closer, not touching him anywhere but his hand, but it felt like crossing a threshold that would never be uncrossed. "Of me?" she whispered. He opened his eyes then, and the raw honesty in them made her breath catch. "Of what I want when I look at you." The truth electrified the air between them. The storm outside faded into background noise. The candles flickered violently, as if reacting to the tension humming between their bodies. Eleanor felt her breath tremble. "What do you want?" Daniel pulled his hand from hers with a suddenness that startled her, not because the touch repulsed him, but because he feared it. He stepped back, dragging in a harsh breath. "I can't say it," he whispered. "I can't even think it." "But you feel it," she said. His face tightened with anguish. "Yes," he admitted. "God help me, I feel it." The admission shook her. "Daniel," she breathed. "Look at me." He did, slowly, painfully, as if it hurt him to do so. The resin on the frame cracked softly with the shifting of the wood as the storm air cooled the room. Daniel heard it and seized the distraction like a lifeline. I, I need to check the frame again," he said quickly, dropping his gaze, his voice shaking. He knelt in front of the portrait, shoulders tense, breathing uneven. Eleanor watched him, her heart twisting. She wanted to kneel beside him. She wanted to tell him he didn't have to fear his own humanity in her presence. She wanted. But the door at the far end of the hall creaked faintly. Both of them froze. The storm was loud, but that sound, small, wood on wood, unmistakable, cut through everything. Daniel tensed like a hunted animal. His hand hovered over the resin jar, but did not touch it. His breath stopped. Eleanor's pulse thundered in her throat. Someone was in the hallway. A shadow passed the gap under the door. Her heart seized. Daniel's whisper was barely audible. "Ma'am, I need to move away from you." But Eleanor grabbed his arm before he could stand. "No," she whispered urgently. "Stay. Pretend you're working. Let me handle whoever it is." Daniel went stock still, his breathing slowed to the faintest whisper. Another creak. Slow footsteps. Eleanor forced her voice steady. "If someone comes in, you don't speak. You don't look at me. You're just fixing the frame. Do you understand?" His voice was so soft she barely heard it. "Yes, ma'am." Her hand lingered on his arm for a moment too long before she let him go. The footsteps stopped right outside the parlor door. The doorknob turned. Eleanor's pulse stopped. The door began to open, and everything they feared stood on the other side of it. The rain did not let up for 2 straight days, and in that stretch of gray-drenched hours, Elijah felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Every raindrop on the roof of the workshop reminded him of her, of the way her breath had trembled when she stood inches from the portrait, of the moment her fingers had brushed his hand as if by accident, of the quiet words she probably should never have spoken. "You're handsome, you know that." He replayed them the way a starving man might replay the memory of a single stolen meal, over and over, until he feared wanting more might get him killed. The morning of the third day dawned cloudy, but dry enough for tasks to resume. Elijah walked toward the main house with a bundle of clean brushes and a jar of linseed oil tucked into a crate. He tried to steady himself, reminding his heart that she might not look at him again the way she had. She might have simply been lonely, or foolish, or unthinking. But as he reached the back porch, the kitchen girl, Hattie, paused with a basket of onions on her hip and eyed him with something sharp in her gaze. "Mrs. been in a mood," she said, lowering her voice. "Snapping at folks. Pacing the halls. You go in there. You best be quick about it." Elijah nodded with a calm he did not feel. "Yes, ma'am." And, she added, glancing around before leaning closer, "Overseer been watching you." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Don't know," Hattie whispered. "But he been muttering 'bout something. He seen, just keep your head low here." He swallowed hard. The overseer, Mr. Cawson, was cruel in the quiet ways, the kind who smiled while delivering punishment. If he had seen Elijah near the mistress, or worse, if he had guessed something, Elijah forced the thought away and stepped into the house, heart pounding. Inside, Margaret was seated in the parlor, her posture perfect yet strained, as if every muscle were pulled taut. She looked up at him, and for a heartbeat, her expression softened, barely, but it was there. He saw it. Recognition. Relief. A flicker of warmth. "Elijah," she said, her voice softer than the room deserved. "Come in." He closed the door behind him, careful not to let it creak. The parlor was empty except for her. Even the maid was missing, which was strange for mid-morning. Margaret gestured toward the hearth, where the newly repaired portrait leaned against the wall. "I want it hung today." The storm finally passed. "Yes, ma'am," he said, stepping carefully around the edges of the rugs. But as he approached, he felt it, the warmth of her gaze. He dared not look until she spoke again. You've done remarkable work. My husband would never notice the difference, but I do. It was nothing, Elijah murmured. No, she said, her voice tightening. It wasn't. Silence pooled between them, deep and slow like the river after heavy rain. He lifted the portrait carefully, and as he did, her footsteps moved across the parlor. He heard the faint swish of her dress, felt her close before he saw her. Elijah, she said quietly. He froze, the heavy frame balanced in his hands. That day in the workshop, the things I said. She paused as if searching for breath she couldn't quite find. Did I frighten you? He turned toward her slowly. Her eyes, blue as twilight and rimmed with exhaustion, held something fragile. Something she wanted him to answer truthfully, though the truth was dangerous. No, ma'am, he said. You didn't frighten me. Her lips parted just slightly. Then what did I do? Elijah's pulse thudded. The way she asked, careful, curious, almost pleading, stripped away the distance she usually tried to keep. You surprised me, he said finally, voice low. That's all. And now, she whispered, now I'm trying to keep us both safe. A tremor passed through her. He saw it ripple across her shoulders, saw it reach her hands. She stepped closer, close enough for him to see the fine gold hairs on her neck catch the firelight. My whole life, she whispered, I've done everything expected of me, everything required. And yet, I feel more awake in a few minutes near you than I have in years. Elijah had feared moments like this, dreamed of moments like this, dreaded moments like this, because a wrong word could destroy them both. Miss Margaret, he said quietly, you can't. Yes, she cut in softly. I can. Her voice wasn't defiant. It was aching, honest. There. I don't know how to explain it, she said, stepping around him so she stood between him and the hearth. The fire glowed behind her like a halo. But every time you look at me, I feel seen. And when you don't look at me, she exhaled shackily, I feel it even more. Elijah set the portrait down before his arms betrayed the trembling he felt. You're married, he said. It ain't my place to be seen in that way. Then tell me, she said, folding her arms as though grappling with her own courage. Do you feel nothing when I come near you? When I speak to you? When I? Her voice cracked. When I see you? He closed his eyes for a moment, swallowing the truth he had no right to speak. But when he opened them again, she was looking at him with such raw vulnerability that lying felt crueler than honesty. I feel it, he said in a whisper. But that don't make it safe. Margaret stepped toward him again, slowly, like someone approaching a frightened animal, not wanting to startle, not wanting to push, yet needing to be closer. When you almost touched my hand in the workshop, she said, did you pull away because you didn't want to touch me or because you were afraid to? He forced himself to breathe. Afraid. Her lashes lowered. Of me? Of what would happen if I didn't pull away? The parlor grew unbearably quiet. Margaret's breath trembled out on a whisper he barely heard. Elijah. When she reached for his hand, he almost stepped back out of instinct. Survival screamed at him to keep distance. But something in her touch held him still. It wasn't bold. It wasn't improper. It was hesitant, as though she expected him to refuse. Her fingertips brushed the back of his knuckles. A soft, feather-light gesture. Yet it felt like the world narrowed to that single point of contact. He let himself look at her, really look at her. At the loneliness etched into her gentle features, the hunger for something other than cold halls and colder marriage. At the way her breath stilled as if she feared one wrong exhale would break the moment. But movement outside the window snapped them apart. A shadow. Heavy. Pacing. Elijah's heart seized. Margaret's hand flew to her throat. The overseer. Mr. Carson's voice drifted through the half-open window, speaking to one of the field hands. His tone carried that false cheer he used before he punished someone. Margaret whispered sharply, he must not see you here. Elijah stepped back instantly. I was just finishing. No, she said, grabbing the edge of his sleeve without thinking. The touch startled both of them. She let go quickly. Not in here. Go through the wine cellar. The side door opens into the back garden. No one uses it this time of day. Her hands shook as she pointed toward the narrow hallway leading to the cellar. Go, she whispered. Please. Elijah nodded and moved toward the hall, quiet, steady, though his pulse thundered. But before he reached the doorway, Margaret's voice stopped him. Elijah. He turned. You want to see me again? The question was soft, fragile as a candle flame. He looked at her, her pale hands twisting nervously, her lips parted, her eyes full of fear and hope and something deeper neither dared name. And he knew there was no safe answer. Yes, he said anyway. Her breath caught, a small gasp she tried to hide. Tomorrow, she whispered. After sundown, at the old oak behind the smokehouse. No lamps, no lanterns. He nodded once. Their eyes held for a suspended second, then he turned and disappeared down the narrow hall just as the parlor door creaked open behind him. He heard Casson's voice, heard Margaret greet him with forced calm, heard nothing else because the blood roared too loudly in his ears. By the time Elijah slipped through the wine cellar door into the quiet back garden, his hands were still shaking, from fear, from desire, from the weight of what he had agreed to. Tomorrow. Another secret meeting. Another step closer to a line they might never be able to step back from. And for the first time in his life, Elijah feared not the danger, but how much he wanted it. The sun dipped low behind the treetops, leaving the plantation washed in the quiet violet of early dusk. Elijah worked through the day with a calm he did not feel, each hour slow and heavy with anticipation. Every knock of a hammer, every tug of a rope, every whispered warning from other enslaved workers struck him with the same reminder. Tonight, the old oak behind the smokehouse. No lamps, no lanterns. He told himself over and over that he should not go, that Margaret had been reckless to ask, that if he were seen anywhere near her after dark, the consequences would be beyond cruelty. But even as he tried to reason with himself, his feet were already walking the path toward her. By sundown, he had finished his chores and slipped away before the lamps were lit on the main house porch. He waited behind the toolshed until full darkness slipped into place, letting the cricket's song mask any trace of movement. The moon was only a thin knife tonight, sharp, pale, and too small to reveal anything clearly. Elijah walked the narrow path between the kitchen and the smokehouse, careful on the packed dirt to keep his steps silent. The air carried the faint smell of dried meat and wood smoke, but beyond that hung something else, something he had begun to associate with her alone. Lavender, roses pressed between pages, a quiet sadness too heavy for him to name. When he reached the oak tree, he stopped and listened. Nothing. Then, barely audible, the soft brush of skirts against grass. His chest tightened. She stepped from the shadow of the tree trunk, hood pulled over her hair, cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Even in the darkness her presence felt bright, as if she carried her own light beneath the folds of cloth. Elijah, she whispered, breath visible in the cool air. He glanced around instinctively, scanning the grounds for any stray figure, any glimmer of lantern light. You shouldn't be out here alone, he murmured. She smiled softly, a sad curve. Neither should you. He swallowed, resisting the pull to step closer. You were nervous today, she said, approaching with slow, cautious steps. I saw it in your eyes. I didn't know if you would come. I tried not to, he admitted. Didn't help much. A quiet laugh escaped her, faint and trembling. I didn't help myself either. For a moment, neither of them moved. The branches above them creaked in the night air. A distant hound barked. A door shut somewhere near the quarters. Margaret pulled her cloak tighter and let her gaze drift over the dark yard before settling back on him. Elijah, I shouldn't have asked you to meet me. I know that. But ever since the day in the workshop, it feels as though something has been pressing on my chest. Something I can't breathe around anymore. She hesitated. The loneliness in that house. It grows louder by the day. Elijah's jaw tensed at that. Miss Margaret, I can't be your escape. No, she whispered, stepping closer. I don't want escape. I want truth. He felt her words press against him like a pair of trembling hands. Truth? He said quietly. Truth'll get us buried. Maybe, she said, the slightest shake in her voice, but I'd rather know it than pretend I feel nothing. Her breath caught on the last word, as though she had finally crossed an invisible line. Elijah, she whispered, tell me I'm imagining what's between us. Tell me I've been foolish. The night seemed to hold its breath. He didn't speak. He couldn't. She stepped close enough that he could see the starlight glimmer in her eyes. Then answer me. Why did you come tonight? He closed his eyes for a long, steadying moment. When he opened them, she was still there, waiting, trembling, hoping for something he wasn't sure he should give. I came, he said, voice low, because every time I walk away from you, it feels wrong. Margaret exhaled a shaky breath, half relief, half fear. And when you're near me, she asked. Worse, he whispered. Their eyes locked, and something silent passed between them. Something too dangerous, too real. But instead of backing away, she lifted her hand slowly, giving him every chance to stop her. He didn't move. Her fingers brushed his arm, soft as a sigh. He felt his resolve crack. Miss Margaret, he started. Call me Margaret, she whispered. Just once, please. His throat tightened painfully. He had no right to her name, not spoken like that, not in a moment that felt like it might change everything. But she waited, and he couldn't lie to himself any longer. Margaret, he said, barely breathing the word. She closed her eyes as though the sound alone had undone her. Elijah, may I tell you something without you turning away from me? He nodded. I think you're the first person who has looked at me without expecting anything in return. The first person who listens. Who sees me. She swallowed. I didn't know how starved I was for that. Her voice cracked, and she covered her mouth quickly, as though ashamed of the tremble in it. He stepped closer, too close, drawn by instinct more than thought. You ain't alone, he said softly. Not in the way you think. Her eyes lifted to his, hopeful, wounded. Then why does it feel like the world keeps us on opposite sides of a river neither of us can cross? Because it does, he whispered. And because crossing it means trouble neither of us can outrun. But do you want to? She asked. Do you want to cross it, Elijah? He drew in a breath that felt like it scraped his ribs raw. More than is good for me. The slightest tremor passed through her shoulders, and without thinking, he reached out to steady her. His hand brushed her arm lightly, just enough for her to feel it. She didn't pull away. If anything, she leaned into the touch, as though she had been waiting for it. Elijah, she murmured, looking up with eyes that glistened in the dim light. If anyone had told me a month ago that I would find myself speaking like this to you, that I would feel more with one glance from you than in all the years of my marriage. She stopped herself with a sharp breath. You make me feel alive. That's dangerous, he whispered. I know. A sudden rustle from the path made both of them freeze. Elijah pulled back instantly, scanning the trees. Margaret's hand shot to her throat. The rustling stopped. Silence. Then, faint, distant, boots on gravel. Her husband? The overseer? A patrolling worker? Margaret stepped closer, voice a strained whisper. If someone sees you, I know. Go, she urged. Now. I'll wait until the footsteps fade. He hesitated, longer than he should have, eyes locked on hers as if memorizing them for fear he wouldn't see them again. Before he turned away, she caught his sleeve gently. Elijah, please say we'll meet again. He shouldn't. He knew he shouldn't. Yes, he breathed. Where? She asked. He thought for a moment. The workshop was too risky, the fields too open, the kitchen too watched. He looked toward the darkest line of trees beyond the quarters. The old river trail, he whispered. Tomorrow night, where the path bends round the willow. She nodded, a small, trembling smile breaking through her fear. I'll be there. He stepped back into the shadows just as the footsteps grew louder. Margaret moved toward the other side of the oak, hiding herself, straightening her cloak as if she had simply stepped out for fresh air. Elijah slipped behind the smokehouse, heart pounding so violently he felt it in his fingertips. He didn't stop moving until he reached the darkness of the workers' cabins, breath ragged. Tomorrow night. A river trail meeting. Another secret. Another step closer to something neither of them had words for yet, but both felt building like a storm inside them. And as Elijah lay awake on his straw mat, staring at the ceiling while the others slept, he realized something terrifying. He no longer feared wanting her. He feared losing her. By the next evening, a heavy stillness hung over the plantation, the kind that settled right before a storm. Not one in the sky, but one building in the hearts of those who sensed that something had begun to shift. Elijah worked through the day with gathering tension, the kind that wound itself deeper with each hour. He felt watched, followed, but nothing happened. Not yet. When night finally came, the air was thick and warm, humming with crickets and heavy with the smell of damp earth. Elijah slipped away from the row of cabins after the last of the children quieted, moving silently between shadows. The moon hid behind drifting clouds, giving him safe passage. The river trail lay at the far edge of the property, where the trees grew thick enough to hide almost anything from sight. The path bent sharply near an old willow tree, whose branches trailed so low they brushed the ground like curtains. He arrived early, too early, and waited there among the whispering leaves. The river murmured softly nearby, its dark surface broken only by the moon's thin reflection. Minutes passed. Then footsteps approached, soft but hurried. Margaret emerged from the darkness, her cloak pulled tightly around her shoulders, her breath uneven. She looked pale, shaken, like someone who had run from a place she could no longer bear to stay. "Elijah," she whispered, almost collapsing into the shelter of the willow's sweeping branches. I wasn't sure you would come." "I told you I would," he said gently. She stepped closer, far closer than any respectable distance should allow, and in the dimness he could see the strain in her eyes. "What happened?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then answered in a trembling voice. "My husband returned early." Elijah stiffened. "Early?" he whispered. "He wasn't supposed to be back till next week." "I know," she said, voice cracking. "His trip was cut short. Something about trouble with suppliers," he said. "But Elijah," her voice dropped lower. "He's suspicious. He keeps asking questions." Elijah's stomach tightened. "About you?" he asked. "About everything," she whispered. He asked why the portrait was disturbed, why the workshop smelled of oil, why you've been in the house more than usual, why I've been taking walks after dusk. She swallowed visibly. "And the overseer, Carson, has been watching me, watching both of us." Elijah's pulse thundered in his ears. "This ain't safe anymore," he said softly. Margaret stepped closer, shoulders trembling. "No, it isn't." They stood there, breaths mingling, surrounded by the willow's shroud. The river whispered behind them like a warning. "Elijah," she whispered, "I think we are running out of time." He looked into her eyes, eyes that glimmered with fear and longing and something deeper, something she had tried to deny until now. "What are you saying?" he asked. She took a shaky breath. "I'm saying, I can't stay in that house anymore. Not as his wife. Not as someone he orders around like furniture he owns. I can't breathe there." Elijah felt the world tilt. "Margaret," he whispered, "you're talking about something that can't be undone." Her voice broke. "I know." She reached for his hand, softly, hesitantly, and when he didn't pull away, her fingers tightened around his. "Elijah, every day I wake up and try to pretend I'm content, that I can survive another year in that house, in that marriage, in that life. And I can't. Not anymore." Her voice trembled. "You may think it's foolish, dangerous, impossible, but I've been thinking of leaving." He stared at her, breath frozen. "Leaving?" he said. "Leaving where?" "The North," she whispered. "Or anywhere that isn't here." Elijah stepped back in shock. You'd never make it past the county line. They'd come after you, your husband, the law. You'd lose everything, everything you own. Her laugh was soft, heartbreaking. Elijah, I own nothing. Not really. My husband owns me as much as he owns. She cut herself off, voice shaking too hard to continue. If I stay, I will die inside. I already feel myself slipping. He looked away, jaw clenched. He wanted to hold her. He wanted to run. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to tell her to forget him. He wanted too many impossible things. Finally, he spoke. Margaret, if you go alone. I can't go with you. She stared at him, eyes widening with hurt he never meant to cause. You think I don't know that? She said. You think I haven't cried over that very truth? Tears glimmered down her cheeks. Elijah, I would never ask you to risk what would mean certain death. She reached up and cupped his cheek, a touch so gentle, so tender, that he nearly broke. I know you can't run, she whispered. I know the price you'd pay, but I needed you to know the truth. If I leave, it's because staying means becoming a ghost in my own life. He swallowed hard. And you want me to? What? Bless it. I want you to understand, she breathed. And I want you to tell me that everything between us wasn't in my imagination, that the way you look at me, the way you say my name, that it meant something to you too. He closed his eyes. It meant more than he could say, more than he'd ever been allowed to want. It meant everything, he whispered. She choked on a sob, muffling it against her cloak. Elijah, if I leave tomorrow, I may never see you again, she said. But I can't go without saying this. A branch snapped in the woods. They froze. Another sound, heavy footsteps. Not distant this time, coming closer. Margaret's eyes widened in terror. Elijah grabbed her arm gently. Behind me, he whispered. They stepped into the shadow of the willow trunk, hearts pounding. The footsteps drew nearer. Then, voices. Low, angry. Saw her walking out this way. Told the master she'd been acting strange. Elijah recognized the voice instantly. Casa. Margaret pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Another voice joined, deeper, steadier. Her husband. Elijah's blood turned cold. If she's sneaking off at night, the master growled, I'll know why soon enough. Keep searching. She couldn't have gone far. Elijah, we must go, Margaret whispered frantically. They'll find us. No, he said quietly. If you run now, it's over. For both of us. She looked at him with raw desperation. What do we do? He listened, footsteps moving away slightly, splitting off in opposite directions. A small window. A narrow chance. You go back, he whispered. Now. Straight to the house. Walk calm. Say you needed air. Don't look back. What about you? She asked, voice cracking. I'll circle wide through the trees. They won't catch me tonight. Margaret shook her head, tears streaming. Elijah. Go, he whispered, brushing her hand quickly, a touch that felt like goodbye. Go. Now. She pressed her forehead to his for one trembling second, a single stolen moment, and then pulled away before her courage shattered. She slipped silently from the willow's shade, her cloak a dark ripple in the moonlight, disappearing into the trees. Elijah waited, breath still, listening. Nothing. Then, Casson's shout. Brr! Someone moved in the trees. Boots thundered. Dogs barked. Elijah took off in the opposite direction, down the riverbank into thick brush. He ran without sound, without hesitation, letting the dark swallow him whole. Shouts rang behind him, but the trail was narrow and twisted. The dogs couldn't follow well along the steep edge. He didn't stop until the plantation lights were distant flickers across the water. When he finally returned to the quarters before dawn, breath ragged and clothes soaked with river water, he already knew. Everything had changed. Someone had seen movement. Someone had reported her nightly walks. Someone had whispered something they shouldn't have. He could feel a storm coming, not in the sky, but in the walls of the plantation house. And he was right. The next day, Margaret's window stayed shut. The curtains did not move. No servant was allowed upstairs. No one saw her. Rumors spread like wind. Her husband had locked her in. Cousin was questioning the household. Someone said the master was planning to send Margaret away to her sister's estate in Virginia, far from Georgia, far from any hint of impropriety. Elijah worked silently, eyes lowered, heart breaking with every passing hour. He never saw her again. Not for weeks, not for months, until one early winter morning, cold, gray, and silent, when a new overseer arrived, replacing Cousin. Rumors whispered that the old one had been dismissed after carelessness with evidence. And that same day, as Elijah was repairing a fence near the main road, a carriage rolled past. Not the master's. Smaller, elegant, driven by hired men. Its curtains shifted, just slightly. A pale hand appeared, gloved, trembling, pressing against the glass for only a second. Elijah froze. The carriage didn't stop, didn't slow. But as it passed, the curtain parted just a little more, revealing a glimpse of her face. Margaret, pale, thin, eyes red-rimmed, but shining when they found him. She couldn't speak, neither could he. But in that brief heartbeat, something passed between them, something truer than words, deeper than fear. Then the curtain fell closed. The carriage rolled away, and Elijah stood in the winter wind, watching it disappear down the long, dusty road toward Virginia, carrying with it everything he could never have, everything he had dared to want, everything he had tried to protect. He lowered his head. The wind rustled the willow tree in the distance. He could almost hear her voice in it. "You're handsome, you know that. I feel seen when you look at me. If I leave, I may never see you again." He exhaled slowly, letting the cold air fill his lungs. He didn't know if she had left willingly or been exiled. He didn't know if she would find freedom or another cage. He didn't know if she would ever think of him again, but he would remember her. The way she looked at him beneath the willow, the way she whispered his name like a prayer, the way they'd touched hands in the shadows, knowing full well it could destroy everything. Their story had been short, dangerous, impossible, but real. And as the carriage disappeared over the hill, Elijah whispered her name for the first time into the open air, letting it drift into the cold morning like a farewell. Margaret. And the wind, soft and cold and endless, carried it away, leaving only the memory, bittersweet, forbidden, unbroken.